we are about to embark on a highly contested midterm election cycle that will determine who has control of the U.S. Congress for the remainder of President Trump's term. Now, in a pivotal state in the Northeast, the state of Maine, it might seem small, but it's gotten outsized attention thanks to a Governor Janet Mills, who is as radical as California's Governor Newsom, but just a smaller state, a little less attention. Until, of course, President Trump called out Governor Janet Mills, a couple of months ago for violating his executive order that prohibited boys from playing in girls' sports. Suddenly, Maine became a player on the national stage. Well, rewind to last week, and in the state of Maine, there was a serious occurrence, a serious violation of election integrity that it seems the government officials, all leftists in Maine, are trying to cover up. With us today is an investigative reporter at the Maine Wire, or as this is my favorite title for him, as the Secretary of State, a very far leftist in Maine, Shenna Bellows, derogatorily referred to him just a conservative blogger, Steve Robinson. Steve, good to see you.
Thanks for having me on, Liz. Yeah, she's referred to me as an uncredentialed conservative blogger and wouldn't answer my questions at the press conference she held in response to the story that we broke about these absentee ballots turning up in an Amazon package of all places. A still unsolved crime. I think we're on now 13 days since we broke this story, and there's still no explanation as to how Maine's quote unquote gold standard of elections could result in 250 absentee ballots turning up in an Amazon package. The closest she's come to solving this crime is to insinuate that there's some arch conservative conspiracy here to try to get voter ID passed in Maine, because voter ID will be on the ballot this fall as part of a referendum, but it's an off year otherwise. No major candidate elections happening in Maine. And so it does seem like they're trying to sweep this one aside, sweep it under the rug, at least keep it out of the spotlight, and make sure that they don't have to answer any uncomfortable questions about election integrity before Mainers vote on voter ID.
Yeah, which, I mean, we can get into all the voter ID stuff in a second, but just rest assured that even though you are a lowly conservative blogger, you now have a bigger platform than Shenna Bellows could ever hope to have. Welcome to the show. And I think that there is a little poetic justice there. So tell us how you discovered this. I mean, you were the one that broke this story. It became a national story, by the way. This is not just local news. There were, I think Fox News even covered it. This is a significant, when I say anomaly, it's not really an anomaly. This is a significant threat to election integrity, because in small districts, if you have voter fraud to the level of 250 ballots, that can change the outcome of an election. So walk us through how you discovered this and what the possible explanations, and not really the narrative that the left is using to try to explain this away, but what's the theory here about how this happened?
Well, so the story was first brought to me by a state senator who'd heard about it from one of his constituents. And by the time that I'd learned about these ballots turning up in an Amazon package, the constituent who received them had already done what you would expect anyone to do to behave, I guess, honorably and ethically in that situation. She called her local town office and asked if they could stay open a little bit later. And she brought the ballots to them and kind of photographed and documented the process as those ballots were put in the safe. And then she said, my job's done. I've brought these to my local election officials. She did call her state senator and apprise him of the situation, and he called me. And then so I investigated from there. And subsequently, after publishing the initial story, we also looked at the tracking numbers on these UPS packages, because Amazon's big shipping partner, of course, is UPS. And the ballots in question are absentee ballots in the state of Maine. A lot of them are shipped with UPS. So we got some of the tracking barcodes on legitimate, unspoiled absentee ballot packages, as well as the barcodes from the Amazon package. And what we found is that the absentee ballots are printed in Waterville, Maine, kind of in the central part of the state, and they're shipped down to Chelmsford, Massachusetts, to a sorting center. And this is where the absentee ballots first kind of cross paths with the Amazon package, because it came up from Rhode Island to this Chelmsford sorting center. And then together, the absentee ballots come back up to Maine, and they're distributed out from there. So right away, the Secretary of State should have known that this wasn't an investigation that she could handle strictly through her office, because it's a multi-state crime scene, so to speak. You would need an investigative agency that can go talk to people in Chelmsford, Massachusetts, can go get security footage in Massachusetts. You would need, in other words, the FBI. When she came out and did her press conference, she said that the FBI was involved, but she hasn't said that she asked them to become involved. And she hasn't really said when she learned about this case. There have been private events and private fundraisers where there have been reports that she has cast aspersions on the local officials in Newburgh. But throughout this entire, I guess I would call it an investigation, but there doesn't appear to be much investigating happening. But throughout the response that the Democrats have crafted to this apparent breach of election security, the best that they've been able to do is imply that there's some arch conservative conspiracy. Like, I don't even know how exactly this would work or reflect well on their ability to manage the elections, but they think that conservatives somehow got into the election, the absentee ballot supply chains and swiped 5 bundles and then just threw them in a random Amazon package and then called me. And somehow this was to accomplish arch political goals. And also, this is, your national viewers won't be as familiar with this, but your viewers in Maine will be. This is a Secretary of State who tried to kick President Trump off the ballot here in Maine, was rebuked or gave up after Colorado was rebuked by the Supreme Court for attempting a similar maneuver. This is a Secretary of State who messed up the Real ID rollout, so all the barcodes on the back of our licenses won't scan. Messed up a license plate rollout where she forced a new design on people, but they had to be reprinted because they wouldn't scan through the license plate readers. So we've just seen one incompetent initiative after another.
And she's running for governor now, correct?
Yes, she is. With that kind of a record, how could she not? And frankly, she's going to be competitive with the other people. She's probably the front runner at this point. But she's immediately settled on this idea that rather than incompetence or a mistake or packages randomly breaking and then them being packed back together, this has to be some kind of vast right-wing conspiracy targeting her specifically and trying to help voter ID. And it really doesn't look like we're going to get any answer to this at this point. I know the FBI is involved. I know that they're interviewing people. I would hope that they're speaking with the motor vehicle detectives who are working for Secretary of State Bellows. She has her own independent law enforcement agency of about 12 detectives who are usually investigating things like vehicle fraud. But now they're working what is, I think, easily Maine's biggest election integrity scandal over the past 3 decades. It's hard to imagine a bigger breach of the chain of custody of absentee ballots. And Mainers really have no confidence whatsoever, no reason to have confidence that these are the only absentee ballots that are out there floating around in Amazon packages. Right. Might just be that these are the only ones that landed with a woman who was honest enough to turn them in. And there are several steps from getting these absentee ballots to being able to cast them at ballot drop boxes. But if you're capable of distributing 250 absentee ballots outside the chain of custody, then you can definitely do that same thing with the envelopes. And I'll remind people that Secretary Bellows testified against a bill that would have allowed for video camera surveillance of ballot drop boxes. I mean, we've seen in other states ballot stuffing. This kind of thing happens. Absentee ballots and unmonitored drop boxes just allows people to go stuff ballots in the boxes. It happens.
It does. And I want to talk about the theories of how this could have happened. Was this a mistake? Was this planted? Is there someone who basically messed up as they were trying to commit election fraud? All of these questions are valid questions that obviously need to be answered, not just by us, although I am not opposed, obviously, to the citizenry playing detective, since our government officials are so often incompetent. But when you asked Secretary of State Shenna Bellows these questions, this is how she responded to you. And I'm sorry I'm laughing because it's just so, the audacity of this woman to not just disrespect you personally, but ignore the question of one of her constituents because she doesn't think he has the proper journalism credentials. She ignored your question. This is a video of it. I want people to look at it. It's crazy.
What information leads you to believe that this wasn't an accidental mix-up with the shipping?
So is there any other question from any other member?
Can you speak to the perception that the public might have of your office investigating?
Is there a question from...
I'm sorry that I'm laughing at that because it's so corrupt. It's it shows the elitism, I think, of these government officials that she thinks she can just, I mean, she looked you in the eye, Steve. You saw that. She looked you in the eye and deliberately looked away from you.
Yeah, and she looked at me in the eye every time she said bad actors are responsible for this. She clearly was implying that she thinks I'm responsible for this, but I was, 1,000 miles away in Tennessee after taping another show while I was, working on this particular story. So if she thinks I have the power to orchestrate a big election conspiracy at the same time I'm in another state, I'm happy to be taking up that kind of real estate in her head. Rent-free.
I mean, not only the practicality of it, but to cast an aspersion on your character as if you would, even if you could.
Well, that's true. Yeah,
is bad enough.
But also, I'll say, the misunderstanding she has about how the modern media works, in that she's, passing over the fastest growing digital media outlet in the state in order to answer questions from like boomer TV networks, and doesn't think also that somehow this is going to turn into 1 million views for me. Like, Shenna, sweetie, I'm going to hire you as my publicist. Like, you just helped us go mega viral with Libs of TikTok and Ted Cruz and Liz Wheeler paying attention to this stuff now. So anytime you want to not answer my questions at press conferences, I'll take it. And I honestly, even though I broke the story, I wasn't planning on asking a question at the press conference until she said at the beginning that she would not be taking questions from me. So
how can you pass up such an opportunity?
Yeah, of course. I've got to ask a question after she says something like that. But there was even more bizarre behavior where she, another reporter from the Maine Wire tried to ask her a question, and she said, "No, you're running against me." And this reporter is an older gentleman and looks kind of like Mike Pence, but isn't currently a candidate for higher office. So she was just very confused.
Is this the video where this is the video we have, Spencer, right? Yeah, let's play this video. So this is Shenna Bellows essentially scampering away from your reporter at the Maine Wire, John Featherston. Go ahead and play this video. This is a funny one.
Hi. It's like, I will know you're here. Yes.
Questions about the ballot?
No, but
Just like to take it as a no comment?
I have lots of things to say, but I'm going to okay.
Yes. And so after that event, she was one of the only gubernatorial candidates to scamper out the back rather than mingle and answer questions. I mean, this has just been the complete opposite of transparency. I know I'm just an uncredentialed conservative blogger, but if I was Secretary Bellows here, I would say, I don't agree with Steve on a lot, but thank you for bringing this to light. We're looking at it. Since you broke the story, do you have any questions? And then you suck all the virality out of the moment. But instead, she looks like she's really, really guilty. She looks like she has something to hide. And I would say that the reason why she doesn't want to answer any questions from me is because we're the only outlet in the state that has actually taken an adversarial approach to investigating her. And that includes Freedom of Access Act requests. And we've fought hard, including with our lawyers, to obtain documents from her office, including her schedules. And we know that she had standing meetings throughout her time as Secretary of State with a group called Democracy Maine, which is a collaborative of Soros-funded groups funded by Hans-Jörg Weiss, who's a Swiss national who likes to play around in Maine politics and in American politics, even though he's never had citizenship here in the United States. She has standing meetings with all of these groups and has never once said what exactly happens at those meetings, what data is exchanged. This is also a Secretary of State who brought in Eric and used Eric to identify eligible but unregistered voters in order to boost the number of overseas voters who are eligible but don't live in Maine anymore, who are still voting in our elections. So she's used every possible piece of authority and data and privilege that comes with being the Secretary of State to maximally advantage the Democratic Party. And so, of course, when someone questions that or examines that and asks about the propriety of that, she's not going to want to answer those questions. Right. The Maine has had two previous secretaries of state in living memory, I guess, in the last decade, a Democrat and a Republican, Matt Dunlap and Charlie Summers. And virtually everybody I've talked with in the state says this would be no problem at all if either the Democrat or the Republican prior to Secretary Bellows were in office, because everyone would trust that, yeah, one's a D and one's an R, but they're pretty much just going to handle this the same way. They're on the level. They haven't politicized the office. But when you have a Secretary of State who literally tried to remove Trump from the ballot, tried to deny half the state the right to vote for president.
I call it an insurrection. What she tried to do.
It would have affected the Electoral College.
I know.
Trump three elections in a row won Maine's 2nd congressional district, which comes with 1 Electoral College vote. She was literally trying to rig the election because she watched too much Rachel Maddow. And somehow we're supposed to believe that she's a neutral arbiter of this election and should be handling this investigation. You know, you've lost your credibility when even Senator Susan Collins is calling for you to step aside and have an independent investigation. And that's what's happened here. Senator Collins is the only statewide official, really the only top-ranking politician who has said Shenna Bellows should not be investigating Shenna Bellows. This should be a federal investigation. There's a huge role for the FBI here. And the clock is running out, frankly. November 4th, this election is going to happen. And Republicans in this state seem to be more of like bystanders or witnesses to history here, rather than assuming that they have some kind of active role in helping to shape what happens here by filing injunctions, asking questions, pressing for more transparency. They're kind of just sitting and watching and waiting to see what Shenna actually ends up doing.